We are continuing with our series, Gentle and Lowly, and I've really enjoyed the series. I've enjoyed listening to Jeff. I usually listen here on Sunday mornings, but also throughout the week just to make sure that I know what's going on. I talk to Jeff all the time about his sermons, but he's really been talking about mercy the past few weeks, and I've enjoyed a better understanding of God's mercy. But I had a question this morning for you. Have you ever been stuck in a moment of paralyzing grief or fear? Those moments that you just don't know what to do. Maybe it's anxiousness, indecisiveness. I've had those times where I know so many people who are in areas of making decision are in what's called decision overload, or decision-making fatigue right now, because so many decisions are having to be made about wearing masks and where to go and what to do and how to do things. People are just tired of making decisions, and we get tired of it. We get bogged down. We get anxious. But also there are those times when our body just shuts down. Maybe it's the death of a family member or sickness that's been going on for a long time. And I can remember times in my life whenever I've gone through those moments and people sit down and so many times they don't know what to say to you. They'll sit down to you or sit down next to you and maybe put their arm around you and they'll share a few words of encouragement, and you can tell that there's a little bit of awkwardness, and then sometimes, but they mean well, but sometimes that there's a couple of phrases that come out. And you've been in those situations, and somebody says to you, I want you just to remember, God loves you, and His ways are so much higher than our ways. You may not understand it now, but God is with you. I don't know about you. I understood that the person saying that meant well, and every bit of what they were saying. But that phrase did not comfort me at all. Knowing that God's ways were higher than my ways, to be patient, and maybe He'll reveal those ways to me. Nothing about that statement is wrong, and because God does have an eternal view, and the way that we see things is just so finite. And so He sees things that we don't see. He understands things that we can't understand. But that phrase, though, His ways are higher than our ways, has been a means to help people cope with their anxiousness and their grief. The idea that we can't understand why something is happening because God can see things and knows things that we can't. But I don't think that this phrase means what we think it means. See, this is not a statement about the surprise of God's mysterious providence, but rather the surprise of God's compassionate heart. I want you to hear this, church. I believe the text that we're going to be reading this morning is telling us that you can't make yourself unlovable to God. You can't make yourself unlovable to God. And I want you to hear that loud and clear this morning. We hear God talking through the prophet Isaiah. And that's you can go ahead and put that up on the screen. It says, "Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call on Him while He is near. Let the wicked forsake their ways and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, and He will have mercy on them, and to our God, for He will freely pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord." See, the series that we're in right now, Gentle and Lowly, we're trying to see the heart of Christ, the heart that Jesus has towards sinners and those that are hurting. So why am I using a time when the Lord is speaking, when God is speaking through Isaiah 700 years before Jesus came along? Why are we using that to talk about the heart of Jesus when it comes to sinners and sufferers? One of my favorite ways that I have seen Jesus' heart comes from a time when he was walking to Jerusalem, and he was coming to Jericho. See, and obviously they didn't have any other ways to kind of let people know who was coming, that Jesus was coming. So I'm sure people ran ahead of Jesus to Jericho and told him and told the people there that Jesus was coming. So crowds began to form. And so Jesus comes in, and these crowds are welcoming him in, and there's one man, short little guy, who can't see what's going on, and so he climbs up into a tree just so he can see what's going on. He wants to be close to Jesus. And he's looking around, and then we know if you've heard this story before growing up, we know that this is Zacchaeus. And so Jesus is walking by, and he looks up, and he sees this dude up in a tree, and there may have been other people there, but he calls him out by his name. And he says, "Hey, little guy, come on down. We're gonna go over to your house today." See, and the thing about Zacchaeus is Zacchaeus was hated. Zacchaeus was the guy that nobody else wanted to be around. He stole their money because he was a tax collector, but he grew up there. He knew these people, and they hated him. I just imagine that he's the guy walking down the street, and he is the guy that that parents tell their kids, you don't want to be like him. And so they move to the other side of the street, maybe. He knows that that people talk about him whenever he comes walking down. Yeah. There's sometimes when I feel that here with myself. I've shared this before, but I ask for so many volunteers throughout each Sunday that sometimes when I come walking down the hallway, people just kind of part ways. Here comes Jeremy. What does he need today? As Zacchaeus was walking down, you got to just imagine that people are looking at him. They know who he is. They know what he does. And they want nothing to do with him. So let's look at this story from the standpoint of the people that are around him, that know him, that are there crowded around Jesus too to listen to him, because people wanted to hear Jesus. You see, they knew where Jesus had been. They knew what he had done. They had heard stories about his great lessons, but also about his healings, his forgiveness. And so they knew that they wanted to be around Jesus. And so when Jesus stopped at that tree and looked up and started talking to him, what do you think their reaction was? Mouths open, just agape, like, him? That's who you're going to talk to? And now you're going to his house? Do you know who he is? Do you know what he's done? Of course, we know that Jesus knew all these things, but maybe they didn't know that. I can just imagine the murmuring that was going around whenever Jesus announced that he was going to a sinner's house to eat with him. Now let's look at it from Zacchaeus' standpoint. Zacchaeus was ostracized, outside of normal society because of the way people treated him. Felt low. All he wanted to do was see Jesus. He knew who he was. He knew he was a cheater. He knew that he had stolen people's money. But he still wanted to see Jesus and do whatever he could to see Jesus. And Jesus stops. And he doesn't just call him a little guy. He doesn't just say, come down here. He calls him by his name. He says, Zacchaeus, get down from there. I'm going with you to your house. He must have thought something was wrong. That's like being called to the principal's office, you know. I mean, what did I do? Because I know who this dude is. I know what he's done. What is he going to do to me? I don't know if that's what he thought. Maybe he thought, this is more than I could ever have asked for. But I tell you one thing, whenever Zacchaeus was going that day, he wanted to be seen by Jesus. He wanted to be recognized by Jesus. He wanted to see what this was all about. Because as the story goes, we know that as soon as Jesus told Zacchaeus, as soon as Jesus told Zacchaeus about all of his love, as soon as he went to his house, Zacchaeus' mindset switched. And he became so different. He decided that he was going to give back maybe even double what he had taken from people. What Zacchaeus was hoping for that day was that even he could be lovable to Jesus. Even he could not be outside the reach and the community of Jesus. And that just maybe he would notice him. This is the heart of Jesus for the sinner and the hurting. That's the heart that we are trying to find in this gentle and lowly series. I want to read that portion again of Isaiah, chapter 55. Listen to what the Lord is saying through Isaiah. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. He's asking people to seek him and to call on him while he's here. Let the wicked forsake their ways and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on them. And to our God, for he will freely pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. The heart of God, the heart of Jesus is different. It is different than what we can possibly imagine. They're so far beyond our thoughts because of his ability to have compassion whenever we don't even know what that type of compassion looks like. He doesn't say he just kind of forgives. God doesn't kind of do anything. He freely gives away this gift of mercy and of grace. And it does not stop. We've heard Jeff talk about that, where it pours out of him. He sweeps us up into his arms and accepts us. This forgiveness, this grace, this compassion is given to us freely without stopping. And it is hard for us to understand that kind of forgiveness because we've all had those times in our lives where we have been burnt. It's hard to understand those times of compassion with our eyes. You see, the Lord goes on and says, for your ways are not my ways. My ways aren't your ways. Your thoughts aren't my thoughts. We are so different. We can't view his expressions of mercy with our eyes. But I love the part where he talks about how they are as different. Just beyond that, he says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. He's not saying we're different by a little. He is saying we could not be more different. We're not talking apples to oranges. Okay? Think like elephants to, a piece of dust. We are different. John Calvin, in talking about this verse, says God is infinitely compassionate and infinitely ready to forgive, so that it ought to be ascribed exclusively to our unbelief if we do not obtain pardon or forgiveness from Him. See, did you catch that? God is ready. God is very ready to forgive us. So much so that we can't understand the lengths that which He'll go to forgive us. And He's saying that if we aren't forgiven, if that salvation is not ours, it is nothing that God has done or nothing that He hasn't done, because He has done it. He loves you. He has forgiven you. He wants you where you are. He accepts you. And what does that do to us? We saw what it did to Zacchaeus. It changed him. Because if we accept that love, we are not the same person. If we accept that love, the way that we treat people is much different. We're going to mess up, but who we are changes. Our salvation is not dependent on us keeping ourselves clean. And I want you to hear that this morning as well. Our salvation is not dependent on us keeping ourselves clean. It's completely dependent on us taking our mess to Jesus. God wants it. We are told that so many times in Scripture. He wants our junk. He was trying to show that to those people in Jericho. I cannot imagine whenever Zacchaeus came back out after they were in his house and he gave away his stuff. I can't imagine what they were thinking. My thought immediately is, we'll see how long this lasts. Have you ever thought that way about somebody? Maybe they're back at church for the first time in years. Maybe we see, posts on Facebook. Maybe we think we know who they are. And so in the back of our minds, it keeps coming to us. Yeah, right. His ways are so much different than our ways. So although His ways are higher than our ways, we don't realize just how low Jesus delights in going. You look at His pattern of who He hangs out with. He hangs out with prostitutes. He hangs out with those that are outcasts, that are sitting outside the city, the lepers, the blind people. Going out, he hangs out with people that are not like Him. Because that is who He is. He delights in going for the people that He loves. He delights in being with the people that He loves. And it's really easy for us to look at others and say, I know that Jesus delights in being with them. That's what He has seen. But I want you to hear this morning as well that Jesus delights in you. Wherever you are at this morning, however you feel maybe unworthy to be here, however you feel unworthy to be seen. There's so many times when I feel that when I'm standing up on stage and leading songs in worship. Because Jesus wants us to be reminded that it is not about you. It's not about me. It's about his ways being so much different than ours. Again, this is not a phrase of him comforting us. This is not a phrase because we can't understand what Jesus is doing, what God is doing. This is a phrase for us to be reminded that God's compassion is never ending and we can't see it. We only need to allow it to happen. We need to let it happen in front of us. I think that's what we're called to, is seeing people differently, seeing ourselves differently. And not stinking judging them for where they are. Because that's what we do. We judge people for where we think they are. And God doesn't judge them. He looks at them and says, I love you. And when they fail and when they come back, he looks at them and says, I love you. So if we knew the heart of Jesus, the gentle and the lowly heart, we wouldn't be surprised at all. We wouldn't be shocked like those people were in Jericho of him going to a sinner's house like Zacchaeus. Because that's just who he is. It's what he does, and we can never be unlovable to God. Because his ways are not our ways. I'm going to invite the praise team to come up this morning, or right now as we get ready for our final song. And we're going to be singing, Lord, I Need You. And I picked this one out for Bryant and the team this morning. Because I know that as I go through my day, that need tends to wane a little bit. You know, I think I've got things covered. You know, Zacchaeus, I'm sure he had a complete understanding of where his life was. I'm sure he understood the money that he was getting, and he made that sacrifice to keep going and doing what he was doing. He made the sacrifice to be a sinner. And then he started hearing about this man who hung out with people like him. He heard about this man who was different. Yeah, he was healing people, but he was hanging out with those that other people weren't hanging out with. And he thought, maybe there's hope for me to turn this around. I just want to be around him. And just like Zacchaeus, Jesus sees us. He hangs out with us. He wants to be at our table. He wants to commune with us. He wants to worship with us at our table. We just need to invite him in. We need to allow him to be there because he wants our junk. He wants to hear it. He wants us to tell him. I hope that's what we can be. We can be a people that hear others' junk and don't send them away, but wrap our arms around them. Not because we are so great, but because he is so great. We can never be unlovable to God because his ways are not our ways.